Hey guys, thanks for watching episode 5 of Talking Ball. Today we're here with Connor Hinchliffe, pitcher in the Phillies organization. And me and Connor actually met through a Maple Zone Sports Institute. I had an internship there, and he was there working out last winter. So we're really excited to have him on, talk a little bit about himself. He's kind of data like-minded as us. So Connor, could you give us a little bit about yourself, talk about your playing career? Start us off.
Yeah, what's going on, everybody? First of all, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk some ball and hopefully we can fill the void for everyone out there. About myself, my playing career is pretty not standard for how you get to pro ball. I played multiple positions like through my whole life, but I was mostly a catcher from like post little league to high school. Like I was a catcher and I was going to school to catch, and there wasn't really anything outside of that. And I got to college. I caught my freshman year. I ended up playing a little bit of outfield the end of my freshman year, and then sophomore year I come back. I play outfield the whole year, mix in some starts at first base. So like in 2 years, I'm already all over the place and out of my original position. So I go to Florida to play in a summer baseball league, the Collegiate League of the Palm Beaches, which is associated with Cressy Performance down there in Florida. And I'm playing outfield at the time. My head coach, Joey Housey, he was a former professional pitcher, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start trying to pitch again because I wasn't catching anymore, and you can't really like catch and pitch. So I started pitching a little bit. I come back my junior year. We have a complete new coaching staff at Lasalle. David Miller takes over as head coach, and I remember initially in the fall, I went up to him and I'm like, you know what? Like I've started to pitch a little bit, and I'm mostly an outfielder, but maybe give it a look if you like it. If not, then whatever. And fortunately for me, unfortunately for some of the other guys, we had a ton of injuries that fall. And for a productive fall for any team, you got to get some live ABs off for the hitters and the pitchers. So about four of us, me and like three others, were all pitching who never really pitched before, and to get the hitters some live at bats. And that junior year, I went on to hit and start at the beginning of the year, and then I kind of slumped a little bit, wasn't really hitting anymore, and then I just started to pitch, and like I wasn't good like at all. I was throwing like mid 80s, getting rocked. I had like a 315 batting average against, like guys hitting homers off me. Like it wasn't great, and honestly like it was almost just like whatever, because I was just pitching to pitch, and I was still trying to be an outfielder. So the end of that year, end of the season meeting, Coach Miller calls me in and he's like, you know what? I don't think you're gonna hit anymore. You're gonna be a PO. And I was like, it was tough. It was tough to swallow because I was like, man, I really like hitting. I think I can get better. And I've hit my whole life. I'm not a pitcher. I'm not any good. And I'll never forget this. And this kind of sticks with me for forever. And whenever I see him, I always give him shit for it. But I remember at the end of the meeting, he said, "It's like, man, you got a really good cutter. You just got to get the velocity up, and I'm telling you, you could play pro." And I was just like, dude, in my head, I'm like, man, you're just telling me that. Like, there's no way. Like, I'm throwing 85. I'm getting smacked around. Like, there's no way. So I left that meeting thinking, yeah, he's just blowing smoke, trying to make me feel better because I'm a PO now. And that summer, I really didn't even do that much pitching work. I was just kind of like long tossing and doing just some throwing. And then senior year, I come back in the fall, like my velocity ticks up to like upper 80s, low 90s. And then my senior year, I pretty much like blow the doors open my first couple appearances. I started my first like 12 appearances. I didn't let up a run. Our team was winning all these games by like three or less. So I was like leading the country in saves. I ended up getting a spot on like the Golden Spikes midseason watch list for like the best 40 players in the country or something. And and that was kind of like the domino effect of, I was pitching really well. I was throwing kind of hard, like still not like really that hard, but I was having a lot of success. And then I started to get some pro interest. I ended up getting invited to a pro workout for the Phillies after the season, threw really well, and then it didn't work out in the draft, but after the draft I got the call to come play for the Phillies. So that's kind of how I got to this point.
That's awesome, man. I mean, that story, just from going from a fielder to a PO, I mean, the struggles you went through, and then now you're with the Phillies. That's just, I mean, the Phillies are my favorite team, so just hearing that, that's really awesome. But I was just wondering, like, how is the adjustment from going to from college to the pros?
The adjustment from college to the pros, I mean, I don't really have necessarily that much experience pitching wise in college because I didn't really pitch that much, but just knowing that like the depth of talent in pro is just outweighs college by like a landslide. Well, I mean, that kind of goes without saying, but if you're pitching in college, unless you're pitching in a Power 5 conference, you're pretty much face pitching against 5 or 6 guys who can hit, and then the rest of the lineup is just kind of like okay. Where once you get to college or pro, sorry, yeah, it's like every hitter in that lineup can do damage, and that just kind of keeps you, sharp for every pitch and every batter, knowing that it's like one pitch and this might go over the fence, and that's one earned run. Like it's not like I'm pitching against the ninth hitter for St. Joe's or whoever else. I'll
Right,
throw a shot at Matt there, former Hawk, but no, yeah, I think just the depth of talent just is way deeper.
right, right. I mean, I can understand that. Um, so one other question I had was like, do they, and I don't know if you could talk about this, but do they have you, obviously you said you're new to pitching and you're still learning, but have they done anything that like, I mean, I guess for lack of a better words, you thought you would have never really done in the pros? Like, for example, like the data baseball and new stuff like that. I mean, how is that going along?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, once you get to pro ball, it's a commonplace now. You're always throwing on a Rapsodo, you're throwing on high speed cameras, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're throwing on TrackMan. Like there's data for just everything you're doing. And when I first got to pro ball last summer, and we obviously show up later because we're still in college, and it was kind of just we just get thrown into games. So there really wasn't that much like development period because we're just going right from school to playing. But that was like the first time that I really just like threw on a rap soda all the time. And even last summer, honestly, like I didn't even really know what all that stuff meant. Like realistically, I mean, it wasn't really till until this off season and towards the end of that summer, just I was just throwing on it and I'd look at it and say, okay, cool. But I didn't know what it meant, how it, what I could change or what I wasn't doing well. And I think that was, a big step that I took to really take that like knowledge to the next level.
All right, Connor. So you talked a little bit about your time at Driveline, right? You went out there this past winter, and I think you have this really, really interesting tweet, which I'm going to really quickly try to share here. And it's your pin tweet on your Twitter profile, which would be Con Hinch, right? And you're
Yeah.
talking about the huge difference between winter 19 and winter 20. And I think this like brings up a great conversation point about um, just how much you learned in between these two videos from left to right. And so I'll let it play a little bit just so people can get a good idea, those who are watching on YouTube. But can you talk a little bit about that, like your development from winter 19, winter 20, and what you would have loved to tell that like winter 19 Connor player? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the start of that whole thing was we at the time Phillies had hired Eric Jagers, who is a Driveline employee, and he's now with the Reds. He's the pitching coordinator there, and I knew that he was from Driveline, and I was familiar with Driveline and what they do, and following their social media. And I really tried to get in his back pocket like that whole summer whenever he was around, just to try and pick his brain about mechanics, pitch design, and just anything. And I mean, the reputation for Driveline kind of precedes itself. Like you see guys who go there and they throw hard and their pitches get better, and it's just like you can go there and really make a difference. And I think the start of the off season, I was just at home kind of training, and my one buddy Brian Marconi, who's with the Phillies as well, he went to George Mason. He was planning a trip out there to Driveline, and I said something to my parents about it, and they were like, "Well, why don't you just go?" And I was like, "What? Why don't I? Like, I should just go." And so that was pretty much all the decision making it was he was going, and he's like, "Yo, come with me." And my parents were like, yeah, go for it. So I planned a trip out there for a month leading up to spring training. And obviously, like, you just see, and like people were kind of DMing me, like saying like, man, what's the biggest thing you could do? Like, you were obviously throwing like not very hard, and then you got to throwing hard. Like, how do you bridge that gap? And honestly, like, going to Driveline was like the icing on the cake at that point. Like, I got to start the off season, I found a tweet or saw something online somewhere that said, if you're a major league pitcher, there's an 85% chance that you're at least 200 pounds, or 90% chance or something, you're 200 pounds at least. And I showed up to the Phillies in June at like 187. Like, I was really light. And it was like, at that point, I was like, man, like, I want to throw harder. Like, I want to be good. Like, I got to get stronger and I got to put on some weight. So a big emphasis in the off season, like when I met Brandon at MSI, was like, I got to eat, I got to put on weight. Like, I got to build that base, because you got to have a base for not only just throwing hard, but like, if you want to throw plyos, if you want to lift hard, like, you have to be able to do that. You have to prepare your body to do that. So I think building that base of strength and mobility for my body to be able to throw plyos, to be able to throw max intent and stuff like that really helped. So once I got the Driveline, it was basically like, I already put on like 15, 20 pounds. Like, I was ready to go. Like, I was throwing max intent. I got a motion capture there. And then through that baseline bullpen where I hit 95 for the first time. And it was just like the icing on the cake. And the motion capture stuff, we went over some things that we thought we could fix. And yeah, and then the rest of my trip there, we were just working on some mechanical things, and I got into a pitch design phase towards the end of that, and then that led into live at bats. So, like, when people are kind of hitting me up on Twitter, like, man, what'd you do? Like, what's one thing I could do to help me throw harder? I always say, like, get stronger, lift a lot, and eat. Like, before you worry about anything else, I think that's kind of a good direction to start.
No, and I totally agree with that. I think that's a really great point. But I love pitch design, and I know Eric with the Reds now. He's like huge. He's one of the pitch design fathers that I spend a lot of time sifting through his tweets and all. And I know. So
Yeah.
we're going to kind of transition to, you have your own website that you've been talking about pitching for this, seems like, quarantine, right? It's Con Hinch.
Mm-hmm.
That's CONHINCH. .wixsite.com, right? And one of those
Still
articles
working on the domain. I gotta get that domain in there some way or another.
So if you want to give Connor a new idea for a domain name, you can just slide into his DMs, right?
Drop a comment. Yeah.
There you go. But one of the articles you talked about pitch design, right? So it was May 14th. You just talked about pitch design. And I think one of the interesting things that you alluded to in another one of your articles, knowing your why on May 17th, is how you were a bio major at LaSalle, and it kind of led you to questioning why. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about that, like your background as a bio major and why it made you question and maybe gravitate a little bit to some of these new age things.
Sure. Yeah. So going into school, and like, this is no exaggeration, like, I was pretty much going to play and get a good education and then pursue a medical career or get a job or whatever. Like, I had no professional interest whatsoever. And so that honestly wasn't even like a priority. Like, a priority for me was get good grades, hopefully get into med school and have a good college career. So like, that was pretty much where like my priorities were at up until like senior year when I started to get that interest. But I ended up being a bio major, hopefully to pursue a career in the medical field one way or another. And I think the exposure to a bunch of different kinds of those courses in that biology program, and I had awesome professors who were really personable, and I still have close relationships with them today. And like, an underlying theme for all of science and that type of thinking is like making claims, analyzing what are the results, how can we change this to get this? How can we, if X happens, is Y going to happen? If it doesn't happen, how can we get there? And I think like there's always an observation. There's an observation, and there's an analysis, a test, and then what are the results, and then retest, and that kind of thinking. And I think that was something that I really started to integrate into my baseball career, because when I just started playing baseball, even earlier in my career, And I go into depth in this in the blog post, but I basically just took whatever anyone told me and just took it as it is, and that was all it was. And I never questioned it. I always just did what I was told, and that was kind of just, I talk about that in the beginning of the post. Kind of questioning things is almost like, some people think it's disrespectful to kind of like question your superiors or whatever. And the more and more that I got around good coaches and people I respected and things like that, they understand you're not questioning them. They just know that you're curious and they want the reasoning behind whatever they're telling me to do. So that was something that I really took into my baseball career. And I think it worked out perfectly for this day and age because of all the technology and the data there is out there, that you can get an analysis of everything, of how you move, of how you pitch, how you eat, how you lift, like literally everything you can do. There's something out there to measure it. And I think what really like turned the page for me was being able to kind of mesh those things together with that kind of thinking, and just kind of use that from my college career to use it now to be able to decipher and analyze the data stuff without being overwhelmed.
And I heard you mention that you're really a big proponent of the new pitch design. So I feel one of the huge things that we like to do at Bloomsburg is, messing with spin axis with your pitches. So I was wondering how much of that you had done, and how it affected your pitches in particular.
Yeah, I think honestly, in terms of pitch design, and I think pitch design is honestly the thing that I'm most interested in. I think honestly, starting at spin axis, everyone looks at the Rapsodo and there's a million numbers looking at it. But I honestly think that if you can get an ideal axis of what you want for each pitch, all the metrics will fall in place. So I think if you have athletes who, might get overwhelmed with all the other stuff, like don't chase efficiency, don't chase spin rate, don't chase other things. Like if you know that you can get a certain movement from this specific spin axis, find those fields that get the specific axis you want, and then don't worry about the rest of the metrics. So like I said something about in my pitch design article about, if you have a kid who's at 120, who's like kind of in the middle of like a low slot or a high slot guy for his fastball, let's try and mess around with it. Let's try and mess around and see if he can get closer to 1 o'clock and get some vertical break, and he can maybe be like a plus lift guy. If he can do that, great. And if it's comfortable for him, great. And if his other pitches work well off of that or work better off of that, then great. And let's try and work off of that. But it's all relative. Like it's a trial and error. If he, for example, we say, let's try to get that closer to 1. If he gets closer to 1 and it feels weird and it doesn't feel natural and it kind of affects the way he throws his other pitches, then maybe it's not worth it. Maybe he's just, destined to throw at that slot, or maybe his other pitches would work well if he throws more of a 2-seam with a run on it. All right, let's try to get that to 130. I know nowadays it's shifting towards more of plus lift and throw up in the zone and stuff like that, but there's still no reason why people who throw with run can't succeed in this game. And I think it also speaks to, hitters are eventually going to adjust. So now throwing up in the zone with plus lift is working and it's getting hitters out, but hitters are good and we should give them credit at some point. So at some point they're going to have to adjust, and maybe they'll start hitting that. And then, the guys like Scherzer or Kluber or all the other guys that are still throwing 2-seams, maybe it'll shift back towards that, where people maybe start to throw 2-seams. The game's always evolving and it's always changing. So, and again, it just reverts back to, like, who is the athlete? Are they a guy who can throw at 1 o'clock? If they're not, then throw wherever they feel comfortable and where they can get the best results at.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, right? Changing somebody who has more run towards that fastball to more of a vertical break, you don't know how that affects the rest of the pitches in their arsenal, and a whole bevy of other things that I won't get into, because I really want to actually dissect a little bit into this tweet, right? So Sean Coyne, who's an intern at Driveline, I think he still is, but he was there when you were there as well. He's been running through every single Friday a top AB's top 5 or 50 pitches. And so you came in at 41 with a changeup, and I'll let this one play a little bit, but could you talk a little bit about like the pitch design of that process? I guess you probably were throwing a changeup for a while, but is this something that you were tweaking with while you were there?
Yeah, honestly, it's kind of ironic that this pitch was the one that ended up on the list because prior to this video, I think I honestly threw less than 15 changeups competitively in my life ever. In probably 60 innings combined in college and pro ball, I think I threw less than 15 changeups. Like I never threw one ever, and I couldn't. I had terrible feel for it. I would either just choke it like crazy and it would go 50 feet, or it would just fly high in arm side. And I would always just throw one in the bullpen or pre going into the game just to kind of have it and show it and say I throw 4 pitches. But realistically, I never really threw one. And it wasn't until I was in pitch design with Alex Valasek, he's pretty much the pitch design guy there now. And Sammy Lizarraga and Bill Heasel, he's out there. He was with me when we were working on that. And I think it was just like changing the perception of how I released that pitch was really like the deal breaker for me. So initially with the changeup, like at that point I was always ripping things glove side. Like I threw a lot of cutters, I threw a lot of curveballs, and I couldn't really throw two seams very well, and I couldn't throw changeups very well. So like getting to that really pronated release was something that wasn't very easy for me to do naturally. So I would pretty much just like not pronate as much, and it would kind of just roll off my fingers, and it had terrible movement. I had terrible feel for it, and it was like a little grip alteration and the cue of like I throw a circle change, so it's just throw the circle at the catcher and don't like worry about having it like roll off your fingers. Just throw that circle at the catcher, and I did that a couple times and it felt good, and I was getting like really good numbers on it. The VB, killing that VB to stay away from the fastball, getting a lot of horizontal on it. The efficiency was good. The velo was right where I wanted it, and the next piece was just getting comfortable with it. The movement was there, the profile was there. It was just getting comfortable with it and repeating it until I could throw it. And then during live ABs, I think the first lefty I saw, I threw like 3 in a row to him, and they were all like pretty good, and he didn't hit them. So that was like the biggest like change, because I went from no confidence in it to, and sometimes all it takes is like throwing a pitch and having someone stand there and say, yo, man, that's like a good pitch. Like that's actually a good pitch and you can use it. And I was just like, wow, really? Like it is? It's not bad? Because like prior, I just had no confidence in it because I didn't think the profile was good. I had no command with it. And kind of all it took was him standing there and saying, man, that's a pretty good pitch. And then it just, gained that confidence, and I just repeated it, and I can use it going forward now. And it's come a long way.
No, that's really fascinating. It's something that I see a lot, especially when I'm tinkering around with Rapsodo. It seems like a lot of guys, like you said, like they are either, when they miss, it's a lot of cut or it's a lot of sink. And that usually tells you a lot about that profile of their arsenal. It's like maybe they're a little bit more east-west. Okay, maybe they're a little bit north-south. And there's always outliers, but I think that that your experience with struggling to throw change-ups when usually you're missing with cut is really, it's fascinating, and it definitely backs up some things that I've read. So I really enjoyed that.
Hey, like last summer, I was throwing. I probably threw twice as many cutters as I did four seams. Like really got away from throwing four seams, and I was throwing cutters like all the time, and I had success for it. Like I didn't really get hit around a lot, but my command struggled a little bit. When I needed to throw a fastball for a strike, it wasn't always there. And my curveball was good, my cutters were good, but I kind of got away from being able to throw a good four seam and changeup. So that was kind of something that I took with me the off season, where it's like, okay, how can I be able to, throw all four or three? How can I be able to throw, increase the others without decreasing the cut and the curveball that I already do pretty well? So, yeah, so I got back to really having confidence and getting that repeatability with my four seam. I am still tinkering with the cut and a slider. I added in a slider at Driveline too. So just I am just adding in things to kind of just keep my arsenal better overall, where I'm not just limiting myself to just ripping cutters and curveballs glove side, because then that doesn't really leave me with much going arm side.
So you talked about all of the pitch design that happened at Driveline, and it's like Matt said, it's all really extremely fascinating. But when you're developing these pitches, like you said, you added a slider. Like, I feel like everyone is fascinated now with the crazy spin rates. I know at MSI when I was there after you had left, Jimmy Yacobonis threw a slider at like 3,100 RPMs, and everybody was like, "Where is this coming from?" But that leads me to my next question. Like when you're developing these pitches, is there anything pitch design that you look for? I know, like I said, the spin rate. People look at spin rate, but is there anything in particular that you like to look for?
Specifically, honestly, I can't really say that I'm looking for like one thing in general. I think that, you know, in pitch design, you need to take into account everything. So, for example, like you might have a fastball that has a crazy good spin rate, but the movement on it isn't very good. Or you might have another guy who has really good movement, but doesn't spin it well. So I think it's like you take everything into account and then you can analyze that pitch. So like you can't just say, okay, this guy's slider is 2,900 RPMs. Like that's a good slider because it might spin at 0-0 and it's not really that good of a slider. Or, it might be, he might be thinking he throws a horizontal slider, but he's throwing more of a gyroscopic slider. So I think it's just taking into account everything and also like knowing the goal of what you want for that pitch. So you might throw a really good pitch, but you might throw a really good slider, but it's the same as your curveball and you don't even know. So that might be two really good pitches, but they're almost identical. So that's like something that you might need to change, or, it's just knowing how each pitch fits into that arsenal and the goal you have for each pitch can help you determine like what is a good pitch or what I want out of that pitch.
Right. That's huge.
Yeah, no. And I could tell that, I know you posted about this a couple days ago. It might have even been today, but you just got certified, right? Pitch design and foundations of pitching. So
Yeah,
I mean, I can tell you have some really great knowledge that I feel like it would be great for others to have. So now we're going to transition. I know we've been going back and forth. We've been talking about your Twitter, your blog, your time at Driveline, some of your takeaways. You posted, and I love this article because Brandon and I do a lot of back and forth talking about Baseball Savant, Brooks Baseball, talking about what's coming out of those and pitch usage. And so for this one, you talked about CC Sabathia and his pitch usage. So I'll give you the floor, and I just want you to give the viewers a little bit of an idea of kind of what you were thinking about when it came to CC Sabathia and how his arsenal changed over his career.
Awesome. Yeah. So I was pretty much just like looking into Savant, looking into Brooks, and I'm just thinking like, I'm not really, really good with these resources. So, and, talking to some of the data guys that were with the Phillies or are now at Driveline, and it's like, how do I get better at this stuff? And they're like, well, get in there, get your feet dirty in there. You can get lost in those resources, but I think being able to analyze those things and just getting experience with them is really cool. So basically the mindset behind this tweet and how I kind of got the idea of it was, first I was looking at like, okay, what are pitchers that have been in the big leagues for a long time? How has their arsenal changed in that time? Or, like obviously someone at 25 years old isn't going to have the same arsenal at 40. And how are they still good? Like CC Sabathia arguably was just as good towards the tail end of his career as he was in the very beginning. So I'm just thinking to myself, how does his arsenal look? How does his pitch usage look? What are his movement profiles comparing like a decade later? Because I'm thinking about, myself, for example, my movement profiles changed dramatically in like 4 months. So I'm thinking these guys have been competing and dominating in the bigs for a decade. Like how does their pitches look and how is it compared to when they started? So for CC, early on in his career, he was like primarily four seam, threw it almost half the time, had plus velo at that time. He's like sitting 95 average. So he's even getting up there towards 97, 98. And towards his tail end of the career, his four seam usage pretty much like dropped to 0%. So when he started his career, he was throwing a pitch half the time, and at his end of his career, he was throwing it 0% of the time. So I just think that speaks to, how diligent he was in his craft and how, pride gets in the way sometimes of how you evaluate yourself. So it's like, look, like, in the beginning of his career, if he thought if someone might have told him, you know what, you might not need to throw that four seam anymore. And he could have been like, you know what, my four seam's good. I'm sticking with it. And maybe he wasn't a Hall of Famer, you know? So obviously he was obviously extremely diligent in changing his game to adapt to the changing times in the big leagues. And we know that hitters approaches and their swings change all the time. So, you know, throughout his career, his four seam usage dropped to 0. His slider increased horizontal break by like 3 or 4 inches, I think. And then he started using that a lot more. He added a cutter at 37 years old and used it for 3 years at like more than half the time. So that was another thing that really spoke to me is like, this guy's been pitching in the bigs for over 10 years. And at almost 40 years old, he just randomly, maybe not randomly, maybe he was working on it for a while. I don't know. But in 1 year, he breaks out a cutter and uses it over 50% of the time, which I thought was just crazy. And I think that, and like going on in later in the tweet, I looked at like how he was attacking different batters, like what pitches he was using versus righties, lefties. Like early in his career, he was majority facing, like throwing low and away for every hitter, righty or lefty, everything was low and away. And for lefties primarily, he pretty much stayed that course. And then righties, it like the difference in the heat maps were like night and day. So for the righties, in I forget what year it was, I think I looked at 2001, he was primarily low and away, and then the 19 heat map for the righty was like bright red all over. So he was literally attacking them all over the place, and I think that was really cool too. Where, you know, just that's just something that I think all pitchers and coaches in general can take a lot away from, because, you know, it's not always easy to make changes, but you know, if you want to be successful for a long time, I think considering he played from, you know, when he was, I don't even know, 20 some years old to ended up playing when he was near 40, like he didn't have that velo to just blow doors open with his four seam anymore. So he had to find ways with a cutter, with a sinker, with a slider to attack. And obviously he was a lot successful later in his career against righties because he found that cutter and he can get in there with that.
Yeah, wow. No, that's a lot of great information, and I think you're really on the right track. The one thing I really took away from your synopsis of your tweets and your thread was pride, right? Having the pride that, oh, you know, I had a 98 mile per hour fastball when he was in his young 20s, and like you said, lived in and out, right? Throwing outside to opposite handed hitters and so on and so forth. But the fact that he had the brains to know that things are going to change, and also see that if he wants to stay in the game for 20 some odd years, or, you know, however long it was, that there's going to be some change that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that. I think that a lot of kids, especially even that are at much lower levels than yourself, they come in, they might get a very, very small taste of the overall data, and they're not going to see Brooks baseball for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But they use something like a Rapsodo and they're like, well, this is a lot. You know, this is a lot just for me to move forward in my career. And I don't know if I want to change. In high school, I got hitters out like this. So what would you tell like a hitter
exactly.
or a pitcher like that who says, you know, I've always spent my career throwing fastballs and getting away with it at high school,
Mm-hmm.
but now he moves on to play at your alma mater, Lasalle, and he doesn't want to change. What are your thoughts? Or what do you got advice-wise for that guy?
I think just that general like synopsis of CC just speaks to like his resiliency and his like willingness to adapt and change, which a lot of people aren't necessarily as prone to changing. So like, for example, younger kids, you know, for a lot of the times or situations, you're not playing against the best competition. No matter what team you're playing on or whatever, usually you're not playing against the best. So it's not like all these kids are playing against the best players in the country all the time. And it's like, well, I'm getting these guys out now like this. They're the best ever. Like there's a pretty good chance you're not playing against Division I talent or Division II talent or whatever you're going to play at. But I think it's just at that point where, you know, you're planning to go D1 or wherever or play professionally, like you have to keep that in the back of your mind of like, is this going to work later? Am I going to get these hitters out in 3 years? Where I think that's kind of hard to do as an athlete and as a parent or coach too, because, you know, society and, you know, sports and youth sports in general have been very, very concerned with immediate results, not necessarily long-term development. So, for example, like, you know, you might have kids at 14 who can throw a bunch of curveballs and get guys out, but is that the best route for them? Because maybe 5 years down the line, they don't know how to throw a fastball for strikes, or whatever the case may be. If a guy kind of throws hard at 14 and gets a bunch of guys out with a fastball, but doesn't develop any off-speed pitches, maybe in high school he doesn't know how to throw a curveball or a changeup or whatever it may be. So I think in general, just for youth coaches and youth programs, keeping that long-term development in mind where, maybe he's struggling right now and it sucks. Like, no one's going to say, being 15 and walking 20 guys or whatever isn't fun by any means. And, you'll take your lumps, but I think keeping that in the back of your mind of he might not be getting better right now, but down the line, this is really going to help him out. And I think that's something that youth sports in general can definitely improve on, because we're always so caught up with 14-year-old Jimmy struck out 14 guys today, and he threw 85 pitches as a 14-year-old, and like, yeah, that's great, but he's not going to be able to pick up his arm in 6 years or whatever. So, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I feel like you really touched on some great points there, and really through when you talked about that and when you talked about the previous article, the biggest thing I got from it was you have to be open to change. You have to be ready to develop stuff if stuff goes wrong and if there is a struggle. And I feel like especially right now with the quarantine going on, it really is a big struggle, and it's really prime time to develop and get better. So I just wanted to quickly touch on, can you walk us through like what's a daily what's a day in your life during this quarantine? How are you throwing? How are you lifting? What's going on through in your mind through all this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one thing that, for all the negatives that have come out of this quarantine, and obviously for everyone's season, not just professionally, but collegiately, I mean, it's not obviously what everyone had in mind, but I think one thing that is kind of cool to see is the creativeness that have come out of everyone trying to get their work in. And one thing that I'm kind of just in the back of my mind is like, everyone's in this position, and at the beginning of the day, you either are going to get your work in or you're not. And, whether that's throwing the ball against the wall or doing body squats or whatever it is, like, you got to get it in one way or another. So like when I got home, went straight to Lowe's, looked up a YouTube tutorial, built a plyo mound. So I got that going. My garage door, my dad hooked me up and like put plywall or my God, what am I trying to say here? I don't even know how to say plywood. Oh my Lord. Wow. Brain fart there. Don't cut that out. This is legit here. But but yeah, so plywood, which is obviously plywood, because everyone and their mother knows what plywood is except for me, is put in front of my garage door. We got like a mat on top of it. I got like a target up there for my plyos. My brother is actually home from school. He's a pitcher at Kansas State University. He is actually recovering from Tommy John surgery. He just started throwing like a couple weeks ago. So for the first like month, I was throwing to him. He was catching with the glove in his left hand, taking the glove off and chucking it back to me lefty. So that was basically my methods of playing catch every day, which is actually a blessing because not a lot of people have people out there to play catch with every day. So, and I get my lifting in one of my buddy's basements. So that's pretty much how I'm getting my stuff in, which is definitely unique, but it's creative.
Oh yeah, that sounds like a blast.
No, I think if anybody's been killing quarantine, it's definitely been you, Connor. I've seen you all over Twitter talking about baseball, really getting your name out there, not just as a player, but just as a baseball mind, a guy who really knows like what he's talking about. So, I mean, I've really appreciated the things that you've been kicking out, and my dog barks. But again, we're going to go through this. But yeah, no, I think I'm really impressed. So, I mean, we're going to wrap it up there. And Connor, why don't you really quick let people know where they could like follow you on social media and see some of the things that you're putting out?
Yeah, so for basically all the baseball stuff, it's going to be at Con Hinch, CONHINCH on Twitter. That feed is basically just trying to throw out some of the things that I've learned or experienced throughout my career. I obviously don't know everything, and I won't ever know everything, but the most that I can put stuff out there for the fellow professional or college or high school or whatever, I'm just trying to put some stuff out there and kind of just explain the things that I've learned. And I put together that website that hopefully people can use as a resource. And my ultimate goal after I play is to hopefully get into coaching or research at the professional or collegiate level. So, I'm kind of using that as like a resource where I can just house and collectively put together all my knowledge that I've gained thus far. And hopefully people can use it as a resource. And again, Matt and Brandon, I appreciate you guys having me on.
Hey, no, thank you. You really do us a big favor for taking some time.
Thanks for your time, Connor.
You got it.